I have never understood the obsession people have with Dogman. As an eyewitness myself, I don't think it's entertaining in any way, shape, or form. It's downright terrifying. And when you add in the fact that if you decide to share your encounter, you will come under the scrutiny of hundreds of people, there is truly no incentive to even talk about it. When I reached out to James, my primary concern was the safety of my wife and young son. The concern was not from dealing with Dogmen, but the people, the crazy people who take this to the extreme. So let me say this. I'm sharing this with you not because I care what you think or if you believe I'm credible. And I totally agree with James that credibility in this little thing is fluid and based on opinions and not fact. However, I worked in law enforcement for 22 years, retired, and bought my dream home. The town I'm in is not rural. It's on the outskirts of a major city here in Arkansas. However, our land butts up to a river and a national forest. At the time I was purchasing it, I was thinking that it would make for good hunting, fishing, and hiking. Never did I think that I was literally buying trouble. We closed on the land and started the process of building our home, and all was well with no signs of anything strange. While the home was being built, my wife and I stayed in our 2-bedroom house, which was closer to the city but outside the danger zone for the criminals and gangs here in Arkansas. Life was fantastic for us. I felt like I was truly a blessed man. Fast forward, we move into the new house, and the first freaky thing that happens is one night I'm in the kitchen. To paint a picture for you, the wall facing outside when you are in our kitchen is all glass, with these huge sliding doors. I'm in the kitchen and I see what looks like a full-blown Indian man walking across the backside of our house dressed in tribal garments. This guy has no shirt on and a war bonnet, feathers and all. He has leather pants on, and he is barefoot, just walking in plain sight. So, I rush outside, and when I get close, he just vanished before my eyes like smoke, drifting away. That was the first strange thing that I saw, then it just got progressively worse. What was strange was that at first all the activity seemed like it was focused on me. To give you a timeline, for the first year it was just weird stuff that I personally was witnessing. For example, one night I'm out back prepping the riding mower in the shed, when I hear what sounds like men running up on the shed. You could hear them talking, and you could hear the footsteps coming in my direction. So I grab a sledgehammer and head out the front door of the shed, and there is no one around me. What made that night extra spooky was the fog that rolled in at the same time I started hearing them. It came from the woods, no wind blowing at all, just this dense fog low to the ground. And then the hair stands up all over my body and the fear kicks in, the adrenaline starts to pump. My body is sensing danger. I'm all too familiar with that sensation. It's the same feeling you get when you have a car pulled over at 2 a.m. and there are 3 passengers. The plates come back with warrants and you just know this is dangerous. You know that feeling, that sense of danger. That is what I felt in that moment. So, I decide that I'm going inside for the night. Not out of fear, but out of caution. It was a few days after hearing those men running outside and not seeing anything at all that I started to experience stuff inside the house. Again, my wife was experiencing nothing. It was just me. Looking back on it all, after talking to Dark Waters, it makes sense that I was the initial target. As he explained to me, when it comes to spiritual attacks, Mark chapter 3, verse 27 in the Bible is how they start. No man can enter into a strong man's house and spoil his goods, except he will first bind the strong man, and then he will spoil his house. Back then, I had no clue that this presence was in the process of trying to bind me into fear so that it could take over my house. I was just going along with life. Next, my wife and son are away at her mother's house, and I decide to watch TV and sleep on the sofa. Well, I fall asleep and I feel like I'm moving. When I open my eyes, the sofa has been moved 10 feet across the carpet. I can see the drag marks on the carpet, and now I'm starting to freak out. There is no one home with me, and the house is big, 5,700 square feet, so I'm thinking, okay, an intruder. Wait, pause. To be clear, I'm telling myself it was an intruder because if it was not, then I had a larger problem. I remember getting my shotgun and clearing my house room by room and finding nothing. No one is there. Again, when I say now that I was being targeted intentionally, I am saying this in hindsight. During that time period, I had no clue what was going on. It was just overwhelming. I felt like I was going crazy, so much so that I decided not to tell my wife about what was going on. It was better in my mind that she not see me that way. You may be asking yourself, what do you mean? Well, frankly, like a crazy person who was losing his mind, seeing, hearing, and experiencing invisible things. This, what I call paranormal activity, goes on for over a year. Then all of a sudden, the real stuff kicks in. Pause right here. Let me say this. When you have been under a barrage of supernatural encounters and you finally detect something physical, it's a release. I know that doesn't make any sense to you, but imagine for a moment you're in my shoes. There is nothing to actually fight. Nothing you can shoot, stab, or kill. It's just invisible forces. I had no clue when the physical activity started that things were only about to get worse, way worse. The first sighting, and to be clear, I had no clue what I was looking at in that moment, was a set of giant eyes. That morning I'd gone to the store, and on the way I dropped my wife and son off at her best friend's house for a play date. Well, I come home and I see that Indian again. This time, he is standing in the tree line looking at me. What stood out to me the most was the darkness in that area. Of course, there is shade in the trees as the leaves block out the sun. But this was different. It was more like a black void that he was standing inside of, and directly behind him was this set of eyes, just above his right shoulder in that darkness. He stood 7 feet tall, and these eyes were 10 feet in the air. All I saw were those eyes, and they were terrifying. This was the point where the eye shine started day and night, and this was the point where my wife started to take notice. She woke me up one night and said that she had gone downstairs to the kitchen to get a glass of water, and when she looked through the glass, there were giant eyes staring at her from the woods. Stop. Pause. This was, in a sense, refreshing to finally have her see something strange and weird, but at the same time I was perplexed. What did it mean? Why all of a sudden was my wife seeing this when all along she had seen nothing? This goes on for a month, us both seeing these eyes watching us day and night, and it gets to the point where I need answers. The footsteps, the Indian, the eyes, I needed to find something out about it, or find a way to deal with it. So I head up the road and start knocking on doors and talking to neighbors. The first person is a woman, Elizabeth, she told me to call her Liz, a sweet little black lady, 82 years old. Her husband died a few years prior, and her grandson was living with her. Looking at him, he seemed like the loser type, staying with grandma, stealing money out of her purse. We sit down and talk, and she tells me that she loved the new house and would have come down to introduce herself, but she has trouble getting around. We get to talking, and she lays it on hard, and next thing I know, Liz has me outside changing light bulbs on her floodlights. I came to her house to get information, and the woman put me to work. Nonetheless, I was happy to help, and that is when I noticed something that opened the door to what I really wanted to know. Liz had floodlights on the back side of her property, but they faced both the woods and her house. When I asked her about it, she said, "You will think I'm crazy." I tell her, "No, I won't. Try me. Why do you light up the woods?" Liz, and I quote her words, says, "There is an old evil in these woods, older than men, older than this town, this city, this nation. There are old spirits and old evils in these woods. My husband Frank was able to hold them off, but since he is gone, all that keeps them back is the lights. They hate that light on them." Imagine the scene. I'm standing there looking into this woman's eyes. You know how it is to look into the eyes of an elderly person. Their eyes tell a story. In her eyes, I saw pain, fear, but also this strength. Like iron or steel, like nothing was going to scare her. When I told her I think I have seen the evil you speak of and told her about the Indian, she laughed and said, "That's one of them ghosts, them spirits. They are just lost. They ain't gonna harm you. They will try and scare you, though." Liz goes on to explain to me that I can come back anytime I need to talk, but she might ask me to do some work because her grandson doesn't help much. When I ask her about the eye shine, her whole demeanor changes and she says, "Now that is the old evil." They come around to test the hearts of men. They tested Frank, tried him good. Every day and night they would come. Every day and night my Frank would meet them head on, showed them no fear even when they showed themselves to him. He never backed down, not once. As she is talking, her grandson interrupts and starts to talk over her, saying that his grandmother Liz was old and didn't know what she was talking about. Liz, quick as a whip, the words flew off her tongue like an arrow. "Shut your lazy ass down and shut up. If you knew what your grandfather faced, you would piss your pants, boy. Go inside." He looks angry, like he wanted to do something, but turns and walks into the house. As he is walking away, she says, "You're gonna find out what your grandfather dealt with when I'm dead and gone, and you are alone in this house. They will test you too. They're gonna test your manhood and your spirit. You just wait." She then turns to me and asks, "You got a Bible?" I say, "Yes, I have one." She says, "Start praying Psalms 91 every morning. Go outside and read it aloud. That will give you some peace for a while, but these things will show themselves to you. They have the right to try and make you afraid. Do you understand?" I'm looking at her, and I know I have a look of confusion on my face because I say, "No, I don't." She says, "You always have a choice who you're gonna fear in this life, son. Are you gonna fear God or something else?" Liz says, "I'm tired of standing. Can you help me back into the house?" I take her inside and help her sit down in the reclining chair. Then she says, "Come back anytime. I'm gonna take a little nap." I leave, and on the walk back home, the conversation plays over in my mind. Her words echoed, "They're gonna test you." Little did I know that test would come later that night. Now, when you think of a test, what comes to mind? Probably a sighting, you know. They jump out of the bushes or tree line. That's what I thought Liz meant when she said they were going to test you. Well, I'm here to tell you that any preconceived notions as to what they can and will do should be thrown out the window. Understand these things are not robots programmed to move a particular way. They don't care what we as humans think about them. They just are. This was the first lesson I learned that night. Imagine the scene. It's 10:30 p.m. My son is in bed asleep. My wife and I are in the process of snuggling, talking about her father who was struggling with prostate problems, when we hear this tink, tink, tink sound like metal tapping on glass. You know how it is when it's dark in your house at night. You sit up in bed, moving your head, tuning into the direction the sound is coming from. We realize that it's coming from downstairs, and my wife calls it. She says it sounds like someone is tapping on the glass doors downstairs. This fear comes over her, and all the color drains out of her face. As a husband, there's something about your wife being brought into fear. Those of you married understand what I'm saying. It makes your blood boil, knowing that she is afraid of something or someone that they have put fear inside of her. This was the first night that I was actually angry about what was going on. So I get up, get the shotgun, and as I head down the steps, I resolve in my mind that no matter what I see, person, ghost, monster, I'm shooting it. Imagine the scene. I come down the stairs, turn right, all the lights are off inside the house. So looking out those glass doors, I can see clearly. The floodlights are on outside. Listen, this really messed me up. Looking out that door, it's Liz. Well, this thing looked like Elizabeth, my neighbor. However, she is old. We're talking about can't walk up a flight of steps, old. This thing, and thing is the word I will use because no human moves like this, is right up on the glass, tapping, and then it steps backward in this freaky jerking motion. What threw me off was that anatomically all human motion starts with our legs. No matter what you do, if you intend to move in a direction, your feet and legs move first. This thing's motion started with its upper body. When it backed away from the glass, it threw its arms backward. Then its legs went back, one at a time. It was almost like something that had never been human pretending to be human. Anyway, it backed away to the middle of the yard, and then, I know this sounds crazy, it starts to pull its flesh off. Stop. Pause right here again. I want to inject something here. When you find yourself in a situation like this, it's not like in a movie. There is no audience watching you. There is no background scary music. There is nothing. Just the insane stuff that is unfolding before your eyes. I told you I had decided I was shooting, and when the flesh started coming off, I opened the door and hit it with a blast of that Mossberg, and things go flying through the air and hit the ground. Oh shit, I say. That's your ass now. I fire another shot. Now it's crawling, trying to get to the tree line, and this is when it just becomes too much for me to handle. Imagine a humanoid figure that took on the appearance of an elderly black woman, crawling on its belly away from you. Its skin is peeling, so the black skin is peeling off, revealing this pale white flesh. The hair, female hair, is peeling away from the head. In that moment, it seemed like it was in fear of me. I felt empowered. It's crawling ahead of me about 25 feet when the legs bend up over the body to where the shoulders are, the hands press down and lift the body up, and now the head is looking at me. This thing smiles, the most devilish smile I have ever seen, and then scrambles off into the darkness. I'm standing there in shock at what I just experienced and start to back away, keeping my ease on the woods when I hear this sound. The closest thing that I have found is the howler monkey. It had the same depth but not the same range of sounds. When that noise started, it was like my body itself started to give way. I'm not sure if it was too much for me to handle or what, but my legs got weak and I turned and ran into the house. Now mind you, this entire time I had no idea my wife was behind me, looking on as all of this unfolded. It had never crossed my mind, and I saw her when I went back into the house, but I wasn't seeing her at the same time. I'm not sure I can make that make sense to you. I was in shock. Now, inside with the door closed and locked, I just stood there. I remember her talking to me, but not what she said. I remember the smell of the gunpowder from the shotgun. It was all becoming a blur, yet still clear. I remember walking over to the sofa, sitting down, and then I was out. Woke up the next morning feeling like I was in a car wreck. My wife had made coffee, and she says we need to talk about what happened last night. She goes on to talk about how much she loves me, and I'm confused. Like, for real, I'm like, I know you saw that. Listen, when my wife goes on to explain what she saw, it really, pardon my language, but we are all adults. Well, it really messed with my head. My wife went on to explain to me that what she saw outside the window was not only the old black woman, but along the wood line were these Indians dressed with feathered hats. They had spears and machetes, and as I was facing off with that thing, they were chanting, "Do you not hear that sound?" I explained to her that I heard nothing at all. She continued, saying it was almost as if they were watching the combat. They were smiling, and when that thing morphed and twisted its body and ran into the woods, they watched and celebrated as it ran. Then they all faded away. She described it like grains of sand being blown away. Listen, that was the first test, and frankly, looking back on it, that was nothing compared to what was to come. Let me talk to the men listening right now. Have you ever felt weak? I don't mean physically tired, not muscles and bones. I mean like your inner man is weak, like your soul has become weak. That's what I felt like when I went back to see Liz. I was drained to my soul. And when I knocked on her door, she opened it and said, "Come on in, son. I heard you down there shooting. Imagine it's been a rough few days." As she turned her back, letting me inside the house, seconds later, she poured me a glass of lemonade and started to cook. Then she said, "You know, when Frank had to deal with these things for days afterward, he would be tired." He described it as being tired unto death, like death had touched him in some way and started to drain his life out of him. It took me a while to realize that when he dealt with that stuff, he would stop eating, and it took even longer to understand why he lost his appetite. She paused, looked up from the skillet where she was scrambling eggs and cooking sausage at the same time, and said, "I used to think the appetite was scared right out of him. Then I noticed that every time they came, and he confronted them, he started to fast. Go without food for days. He didn't even realize it because it was his spirit man recharging for the next fight. I would make him food, and he would vomit at the smell of it until we figured out that when he was in that state, we needed to pray. 3 days, no food, he would pray, and when the time was over, he would be stronger, more vibrant than before. It was like he was in training. My husband would pace outside around the house like he was looking for a fight. Days would pass and nothing, then they would come and he would confront them outside. Strange things would happen. Tree roots would come alive, the east wind would blow, knocking him off his feet, 60 miles per hour winds, only hitting him, never the house. Then the wolves would come. They always came on the east wind. Dogs of hell is what I call them, but he would stand his ground, never back down, even as they closed in on him. Then one day, guess what? He figured out that they should be scared of him, and that turned into him believing it, and then I started to believe it as well. Well, when we figured that out, the bigger ones came. 14-foot-tall monsters, wolves, yeah, they were mad. But by then, so much had happened that my husband and I knew that God was protecting us. It didn't matter what they did. He would just go on about his business. I'm not talking about church and religion stuff. I'm talking about the power of God, Jesus walking on water power. Once my husband figured it all out, he would walk right into the woods with them and they would not do him a thing. You know how it is when old folks talk. You can tell they are reliving what they are telling you. She stopped talking and plated the food and said, "Now, I need you to eat, and I need you to bring your wife with you the next time you come. We should talk." Then Liz touched me on my shoulder, and when I tell you I have never felt anything like that. It was like an electrical shock wave hit my body. I felt like a car battery that had been just jumped after sitting in the cold. It felt like the room became brighter, the food smelled better. To this day, I cannot explain it. What I knew in that moment was that she had tapped into the power of God. I just didn't know how much she had done so, nor did I understand that Liz was going to play such an important role in the next 3 years of my life and my family's life. Over the next 30 days, things were quiet, almost as if we were given a reprieve, a break from all the craziness. During that time, my wife and son spent a lot of time with Liz, and she asked me to mentor her grandson. She told me about his life. His father, her son-in-law, was arrested for attempt murder of the man who tried to rape his mother, her daughter. This happened in Little Rock. His father gets arrested for attempted murder. Then her daughter was overcome with what she called a spirit of guilt. Her eyes watered as she explained it all. She prayed, tried to pray that spirit off of her, but her daughter wouldn't let it go. Yas, short for Yasmina, just couldn't accept the fact that she couldn't have done anything different to prevent that wicked man from trying to rape her. Then one day, she saw him out on the streets, free, and her husband in prison. So she went to the car, got a gun, and shot him in the head in broad daylight, mafia style, walked right up behind him. Then she went home to be with her son and waited. When the police came, they took her, leaving the grandson with her and Frank. Well, I started to spend time with her grandson, and you could tell he was yearning for male attention, just someone to talk to. Now he had to get over the fact that I was white and that I was an ex-cop. However, after we got past that point, he and I hit it off well. That's when he opened up one day. We were at my house in the back. He was helping me with the lawnmower when he said, "You know what? I think these things in the woods, they want you to treat them like they are the boss, you know? They all seem the same to me. They want us humans to be afraid and fall down shaking in front of them, and when we don't, it confuses them." Warren went on to tell me this story about when he was 14 years old, and he and his grandfather went into the woods looking for their dog. The dog had been barking all morning, broke the chain, and took off into the woods. His grandpa, Frank, loved that dog, so they went looking. According to Warren, they walked for miles before they found him, and when they did, he was hiding inside a downed tree trunk. He said Frank knew where the dog was because they followed the growling and commotion coming from the woods. They could hear the dog barking and the sound of the chain. When they got there, they realized these creatures had chased the dog inside the log and had been rolling the log around. He said that's when Frank got angry, commanded them to show themselves. He said the leaf litter started to move, and it was like these creatures came out of the earth itself, and two of these big brown wolves stood there less than 30 yards away. Frank told them they had no right to mess with his dog, that they were legally in violation, and then he commanded them to leave. One turned and walked away, but the other just stood there looking, staring at him like it wanted to kill him. According to Warren, this was the most intense standoff he had ever been involved in. They just looked at each other for minutes before Frank said, "Get going before I call for backup." The wolf looked up towards the sky and then turned and walked away. When I asked him what he meant by backup, Warren said he never really understood it, but his grandpa told him that there were angels that would come if he called for them. When I asked him if he ever saw one, he said no. However, he did say he witnessed what looked like flashes of lights going through the woods when Grandpa would go out at night to confront them. Warren described it as lightning that went horizontally, burning trees and all. The next day, he took me to the trees on the backside of their property and showed me the trees he talked about. This was an entire set of trees still alive with holes through the middle of them. If you looked through the first, you could see where this energy hit and went straight through each of them, looking from one hole to the next. This was one of the strangest things I'd ever seen. Over the next few days, a sense of peace began to settle in as my wife and Liz grew closer, and my wife and I had more time to ourselves since Liz would babysit our son. She said it was important that the two of us keep a strong relationship. I can't recall the exact day, but it was early August when the activity started again. This time it was different. It was explosive. Have you ever seen trees swaying in the wind? How the treetops move with the wind? Well, imagine seeing them move back and forth without any wind and without any sound. That's what started to happen in the daytime, trees swinging in the woods behind the house with no wind and no sound. It was as if the trees were dancing, but it was when the sun went down that the really weird stuff started to happen. I could feel it in the air. It felt like a storm was approaching, but there were no storm clouds and no wind. Yet the air was electric, filled with this static, and I could sense that something was coming. What made it worse was this urging to go outside and face it. You know that feeling guys get when your bladder is full, how you feel swollen. It's not so much pain, but an aching to urinate. That's the same feeling I had in my gut, an aching feeling, as if something had to come out. It started early, around 8 p.m., when I heard my name being called from outside. It sounded like a man calling me, but the tone was authoritative, like a father calling a son. "Come outside. Come outside right now." When I got outside, no one was there. To be clear, there was no person there, but something was. As I'm standing there, this light starts to move in the trees. It looked like a cell phone light, just a square, rectangular light, darting back and forth as if it were searching. Then it gets to this spot and brightens up, illuminating the entire area almost like a spotlight. This was the first time I saw one of the wolves. It was crouched low to the ground, moving in my direction like a lion stalking prey. What was even weirder was that it seemed unaware of the fact that it was completely lit up. It just kept stalking and moving slowly, its eyes locked on me. It was in that moment that I knew it saw me as prey. I'm not sure why I said this, but the words just came out. "I can see you." It stopped moving and looked around as if it understood what I was saying. Then it started again. I said, "I can see you. I don't know what you think is going to happen, but in a few minutes, I'm going back inside to get my shotgun and I'm going to shoot you in the face." Listen, this thing stops and slowly stands up. Watching this smooth motion, I understood how they could sneak up on people. There was no sound whatsoever as it moved. Now it's standing, every bit of 8 feet tall, looking directly at me. I think it realized that I could see it. Again, it's oblivious to the bright light suspended above it, and I'm looking at this thing in its eyes. Then it growls. This was different from the sound I heard before. This growl was like a spear. I felt it hit my body. It growled, then waited, and I said, "Look, I can see you. Stay right there. I'll be back." As I started to back up towards the house, it felt like I was walking in water. Every motion was heavy and laborious. I grabbed the shotgun and walked back right up to the wood line, now 15 yards away from me. It wasn't until I raised the shotgun and pointed it directly at this thing's head that it realized I could actually see it. It looked at the shotgun, then at my eyes, and a look of confusion came over its face, like, "This one is different." And then it turned and walked away. I want to be clear, it did not flee like it was afraid of me. It gave me its back and walked off, as if to say, "I dare you to do something human." After that night, I believe I was now fully on their radar, because we all went through this intense period of being watched. Now, this is the craziest part about the months I called the watching hours. It didn't matter where we were. By we, I mean my wife and I. If there was a patch of woods, brush, or trees, they were there. How that happens, I have no clue. But what I can tell you is this: when these things watch you, you can feel it, and they don't hide the fact that they are watching you. That was the most confusing thing about it all. Until Liz explained it to me one evening. She and Warren were at the house for dinner, and I asked her if she had ever seen the wolves watching her and Frank when they were not at home. She laughed and said, "Oh yes, they studied us like we were their homework. Looking for weaknesses is what they do. They studied Frank and me for over a year. Then they made their move." Yes, it was all about Frank, though. Everything was designed to scare my poor Frank. What they didn't know was all they did was piss him off even more. That led to a fire. He tried to burn them out of their home because they tried to run us out of ours. The worst part about all the watching was that it felt like they had all the time in the world, like time was on their side. And they knew it. We had stuff we needed to do, burdens of just being human, the busyness of life. But for these creatures, we were their business. I will say this, during that time period it was relatively peaceful. Not much craziness happened, at least to any of us. However, there was a period when all hell broke loose in the woods. Warren called it the rumble in the woods. I remember that day. Our families had reached the point where we had keys to each other's houses. It was 9 a.m. Saturday morning, and I heard the front door open and Warren's voice saying, "Hey, you guys awake?" 30 minutes later, we were outside in the back by the woods, and he said, "Listen, they will be fighting soon." All I heard was what sounded like birds singing, but the singing was off. According to Warren, whenever you hear those sounds, the fake bird sounds, it's the Bigfoot moving through the area. He said that Frank explained to him that this is when the fighting always starts. I'm standing there confused when he says, "Let's go see." I'm like, "See what?" "See if they have been fighting yet." Now pause. I want you to understand, at this point, I had seen so much I was desensitized to almost anything. So we went into the woods, and he explains to me that we are looking for signs where the game has stampeded and left the area. It was at this point that I learned how much of a true menace Warren actually was, because we are walking through the woods, and this is way before I understood what the signs of Bigfoot were in the woods, like the tree structures, the twisted limbs, and Warren is just messing with stuff. He walks over to these 3 trees that were neatly arranged and says, "See this? It's a Bigfoot marker to let the wolves know they are here and not to come any further." Then he gets a running start and rams into it, knocking it over. Looks at me and says, "That will help get the party started." We move further and come to this trail. He stops, looks, and says, "Oh, they have been hunting over here already. The wolves are not going to like this." Then he walks over and shows me this blind right off the trail, an ambush spot, less than 5 feet from the trail, filled with wax myrtle plants. He picks up a handful of that and starts to walk up the trail. As we are walking, just casually talking, he says, "We might want to step off this trail. Sounds like something is coming." He pulls me to the side, and we stand there. I can hear movements off in the distance, and it closes on us in seconds. And it's deer. They are hauling ass, 25 in a row, leaping and bounding. You know it's some weird stuff happening when a deer runs past you and looks at you like you're crazy, like Bambi from a cartoon, like, "Stupid human, don't you see us running?" You might want to run. Now remember, I told you Warren is a menace. After these deer pass, he says, "Seems like they are all hunting." He turns around, goes back to that blind, and crawls in and comes out with these wet leaves that smelled to me like 15 gallons of urine. He just starts to toss them all over the trail. Then he looks at me with this mischievous grin and says, "Well, there will be no more flushing game down this trail, so they will have to switch to their ground game and hunt at night. This is the main trail in this area. Now they will all have to hunt together at night until it starts to rain." Listen, we got back to my house and Warren starts to set lawn chairs out in the backyard. My wife and I are like, "Yeah, what are you doing?" He says, "No worries, y'all go do what needs to be done. I'm just preparing for later tonight." He has gone to the shed and gotten a little table, gets bottles of water, sets up this comfortable area, then says, "I'll come back later tonight." My wife is like, "Warren, we are not going to be up late tonight messing around with those things." He just looks and says, "I know you don't want to be up, but you kind of don't have a choice." Then he leaves the house. Fast forward to 7 p.m. We were having dinner when Warren knocks and comes in through the front door sitting down at the table. He and my wife start talking, and he's visibly excited. She asks, "Warren, what is about to happen?" And he replies, "Trust me, you don't want to go to sleep. You have to hear this." We finish dinner and he takes her outside, showing her the comfortable spot he had set up for her, complete with a lawn chair, pillow, and blanket. By this time, Warren had started treating my wife like the mother he never had, and he was very protective of her. At the same time, he would listen to what she said and follow it. It was like having an older son that didn't live in the house, so now we were all outside just talking when we start to hear those birds again. They were bird sounds, but too deep to be birds, and Warren says they are hunting. He goes on to explain the sounds, and it was like we were given a key to a secret language of the woods. When the fake birds started, all other normal sounds of the woods stopped. No crickets, nothing. Warren says, "Okay, it's just a matter of time before it starts because there's no way they can all hunt in the same area." He reminisces about the last time they all fought. The woods looked like a tornado hit. Then he changes the subject and starts to talk about this book he and my wife were both reading. She had introduced him to Resurrection Bay, a book about a deaf detective. My wife tried to get me to read it, but I just couldn't get into it. Like, how are you going to solve a crime when you can't hear? It was just too much for me. Picture the scene. The two of them are geeking out about the book, and I'm getting up because now my wife, who wanted to go to bed, asks for a glass of wine. I'm thinking, well, I'll be damned. The two nerds are having a book club meeting. When I get to the back door, it starts. This yell, man, it sounds like a blowhorn going off. Warren says that's a sentinel telling the rest he spotted something dangerous. Then you hear this whooping from all over the place, and he's giving us a play-by-play. They're sounding off now, letting each other know where they are. Then it goes quiet, dead silent, for like 5 minutes. I go inside, get the wine, come back out, and sit down. Now my wife is all into it, asking, why is it quiet? Warren explains it's kind of a standoff. They're giving each other a chance to leave. There have been times this happened and then nothing else. Other times, all hell breaks loose. It was like nature, all of nature, was waiting for a response, and when it came, it sounded like a T-Rex dinosaur responded from way off in the distance. Then it was on. Growling, whooping, trees breaking off in the distance. Then we started to hear stuff near us moving, coming down the ridge to the west of us, and Warren said, "Now the big boys are coming. Cover your ears." Listen, there is this growl that converts to a scream, then to a roar, all in the same breath. And for the next 4 days, when the sun went down, it sounded like a war was happening in the woods and hills behind us. There was no sleeping during that period. There would be these brief pauses in the action where you'd fall asleep for a few hours, and then it would sound like a tree was being ripped in half and thrown. This entire time, we had another neighbor who was super standoffish. Frankly, he was weird and rubbed me the wrong way. Never spoke, but always was eyeing my wife. Warren said he never liked the man ever since he was a kid. Our meeting him was almost as violent as the fighting going on in the woods.